Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as we welcome an amazing guest, Dr. Heidi Horvick. Dr. Heidi is a trailblazer in chiropractic science and neurophysiology. With a PhD from the University of Auckland, Dr. Horvick has spent over 15 years researching how chiropractic adjustments influence the brain and nervous system. As director of research at the New Zealand College of Chiropractic and founder of Horvick Research, she's helping bridge the gap between clinical chiropractic practice and cutting edge neuroscience. Get ready for a fascinating conversation with one of the profession's most passionate and pioneering voices. Yes, she is one of the most beloved guests on Adjusted Reality podcast. And by popular demand, she's back. Don't forget, you can revisit her precious and powerful previous episodes anytime for even more insights. Well, here we go. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Horvick.
Absolute pleasure, Sherry. Absolute pleasure.
It's so fun to have you back because I know you're so
I've got to,
busy.
I've got to give you an updated bio because it's been 24 years
Oh,
now
goodness.
that I've been doing this research, and I've had a promotion. I'm now vice president of research
Okay, you
and dean of
do.
research
Yes.
at the New Zealand
Vice
College.
president of research. And you know, the best part about you is you don't stand still. There's no moss that grows under your feet, as my mom would always say. It's always go, go, go. So I can't keep up with you. Although, you know, research is research. It's critical. This is critical conversation. And I want to start with right now. The world is a little bit disheveled and we've come through some very difficult times, and you walked us through those in the past on Adjusted Reality. But now is the time. I need to talk about what your latest publications are. What research are you doing? And then we'll dive deeper into some of the latest research that just came out that I'd love your comments on. So first and foremost, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Tell us what you've been working on.
Well, it's getting really, really exciting because I know we've talked about it before. We've talked about how important the spine is and how the spinal bones are supposed to move because it activates the little muscles around the spine that then communicate with the brain. So, what's the absolute latest now, Sherry, is we've been doing one more research looking at where in the brain are the changes taking place and what different parts of the brain are having different conversations after getting adjusted by your chiropractor. And it's getting so exciting. I hardly know what to do with myself. Like, honestly, the last 12 months, I have learned so much about a lot of these brain networks, is what they're called. It's really just groups of neurons in the brain and different parts of the brain having a particular conversation. But some of these network changes are really interesting because they're also involved in why people develop things like anxiety and depression or how they develop chronic pain. And I don't know if our listeners know about this, that a lot of like chronic problems, especially say something as simple as chronic pain, like say you've got a chronic elbow pain, there might actually not be anything wrong with your elbow anymore. Especially if you've had that pain for more than 3 months. People still think, no, it's here that it hurts, here in my elbow. But what we know from the research is that there's all sorts of adaptations that have taken place in our brain, and particularly within certain networks. And what I mean with these networks is that there's different parts of the brain that have conversations together, say, for example, about the elbow. And 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 these brain conversations might be maintaining this sensational feeling of pain in the elbow, even though the elbow tissues themselves have healed. And you might wonder, well, why on earth would the brain do that? Well, this is when it gets interesting. So can I dive in and share with you just some
I
of them?
I'm dying. I'm on the edge of my seat because I think about people that talk about, you know, the rumor that was spread 5 years ago, and they stick to it and they swear that it's facts. It's kind of
Yeah.
like when we said, oh, opioids are non-addictive, and they stuck to it. They said there's research that shows And then 2023 June Lancet study comes along and says, no, 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 no. Sorry, we actually don't have that research. And it reminds me of how our brain holds on to this stuff, like
Yeah.
our healthcare providers, because we were told something that we think is right, and yet, many years later we find out it's wrong. So please
Well,
continue
that's
saga.
exactly the perfect analogy into this, Sherry, because, and that's why I love talking to you, because the brain does this. The brain creates its own rumors that are not necessarily true, and it keeps on to it. When I first started to learn about this, honestly, it must be about 10 years ago now, going to these neuroscience conferences, and I'm like, what? The brain isn't actually bothering to pay attention to what's genuinely happening outside of us and inside our bodies. It creates its own stories and it relies more on the story. Are you kidding me? I was like, how does that work? But it turns out, you see, that when the brain genuinely pays attention to the sensory information that's happening outside in the world around you, like what you see, hear, feel, and smell, and all of that, and all of the sensory information happening inside us from our muscles and organs and glands and emotions and all of that, it it doesn't, if it is actually genuinely paying attention, it uses an awful lot of energy. So I don't know if you've ever noticed, like if you like get into that sort of a fight and flight response, or have a bit of a shock or a real argument, and you get emotional. If you notice how it drains you, because when you
Absolutely.
get into those situations, your brain is genuinely paying attention, and it just drains an awful lot of your energy, so you feel absolutely exhausted afterwards. This is why neuroscientists believe that the brain tells itself a story, and that story may include that you've got anxiety and depression and elbow pain, right? And even though the elbow pain's healed and it's like the brain's story has created, this is who I am, and like the rumor, and it hangs on to it. And it's really interesting. So what we're finding now with chiropractic is when we're adjusting the spine, like when a chiropractor sets up and puts that little force into the spine and you hear the little clicking noises and whatnot, what we're actually doing is we're waking the brain up. And so you're alerting the brain, it genuinely pays attention, and then it sort of seems to recalibrate because it's going, oh, I don't need to feel that anymore, and oh, actually, there's nothing wrong in my elbow. I'll stop it feeling pain, and oh, why am I feeling anxious? Oh, I don't know. There's actually no need for that. Let's just calm that down, and it's weird. So. Because the reason I'm saying this is one of the recent studies that we did publish was back in November now,
Seems like
2024.
forever ago.
What we found there was with a 4-week clinical trial. So it's 4 weeks, and people got randomized into either getting chiropractic care or not. Really clever chiropractor in the UK. Got to give him a shout out. Jerome Papel, amazing chiropractor. The study was funded by the Duke of Bedford as well, really. So it was anyway, long story short, what we found over the 4 weeks of chiropractic care is that the patients not only got much better with their pain that they had some back pain, but they were significantly improved in anxiety and depression and changes in fatigue levels, and they had better light sleep. So we had this conglomerate of changes. And with the EEG that we were recording in the study, we could see specific brain conversations changing. And this is these networks that were so exciting because these particular networks that we were looking at in this study relate to how the brain's story of itself. So just what we were talking about, this story that the brain creates for itself. And we had these major changes in the group that got the chiropractic care. And the particular conversations were all about who am I? How do I feel emotionally? How am I processing my proprioceptive information, which really just means the stretch information from our muscles. So it's how your brain knows where your arms and legs are, even though you've got your eyes closed. It does that because of stretch information. So what the research is telling me is that the information from these little muscles around our spine probably represent the core of the body. So when your brain is trying to interpret what's going on for me, I kind of need to know, well, where am I? Not just who am I, where am I? What do sensations from my body mean? And see, if my brain interprets those sensations to be a danger in something to do with my arm, it will make me feel elbow pain. If it's sensing that it doesn't know what's going on in the back, it might give me back pain because we know that the pain feelings are actually created by the brain. And this is a really interesting thing as well. This, this, like we used to think, right, that pain feelings that we experience are because of tissue damage somewhere.
Sure.
We used to think that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people still might have that. conception that if their elbow hurts, there must be something wrong with the elbow, or if my back hurts, there must be something wrong with my back. And it turns out doesn't have to be the case. It could just be that the brain isn't fully active aware of what's going on. So it's not controlling the system better. But what we now understand when it comes to pain, we literally call it a danger warning system, not a tissue pathology notification system, if you know what I mean. It's a big, big distinction.
It is. And going back and thinking through what you just said, it's really pertinent that our listeners understand that although our brain can feel and sense and has this nervous energy coming to it and towards it, it's really about how it's being interpreted for
Exactly.
whatever the actual reaction is. As we know in life, and it's very simple, for every action, there is, some would say, an opposite reactions. It's a real time moment that we reflect on how our brain is doing. It reminds me back to Dr. Newstead, who studies the brain from a different perspective on how it actually tells you, cognitively, am I good? Am I bad? Am I ugly? Am I smart? It comes back to that. So many times our brain lies to us,
Mhm.
especially the left side. As he had noted, it's the left lying brain. It lies to you. It'll tell you that you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, you're not capable enough, you're not worthy enough. And as you just said, Heidi, is
And
we
it's very real. It's very real, Sherry, that
it
like those
is.
feelings of pain or the feelings of unworthiness, like they are very powerful and strong. And it's
Yeah.
not like no one's saying that anyone's making it up, like
No.
it's not, but the better we can understand what these things are, like what anxiety is, what depression is, what chronic pain is, the better we understand it, I feel like it's empowering because it enables us to address it as best we can. Because there are things we can do. Like, for example, when it comes to like the anxiety and depression, we know that people with the worst kind of depression, they tend to ruminate or dwell in that
Right.
negativity. And so you spend a lot of time listening to that monkey brain that you were just talking about. You're not good enough. You're hopeless. You are. That's rumination. And it actually even shows up in some brain areas. Like, for example, people that are very depressed, they have in this part of the brain called the posterior cingulate cortex, doesn't really matter, but there's a real imbalance between the left and right brain. Interesting, you were just talking about that with, with the left brain. Because there's very clear differences in activity in the left to right brain. And in this particular study, when we were with the chiropractic care where we had these significant improvements, not just in the pain, but in the anxiety and the depression, we had a change as well in that particular part of the brain
Wow.
between the left and the right side. I'm like, wow. So not only are we showing that the information from your spine is so important for your brain so it can accurately perceive what's going on, but it's changing conversations within your brain that explain why these people had less clinically meaningful, less depression after that 4 week period. And I'm not saying if you got depression or anxiety, go run to your chiropractor as the first port
Right.
of call. I'm not saying that, but it shows an important part of it because you want to kind of hijack the brain if you can with this signal, which is that what that adjustment is, that wakes the brain up so it starts to recalibrate. Like you want it to go back in the right direction, but the only way it can change that story is you've got to get in there. It's like the old cassette tapes. Do you remember the old cassette tapes? I mean, I'm
Yes,
that
I
sort of giving away
do.
my age, isn't it? But you actually had to put a tape in a cassette player and press play,
Yes.
right? You can't scream at the cassette player and say, change the tape. This is what Bruce Lipton talks about. You got to get in there. But it seems like the adjustment is like a biohacking method in a way that can go in there and pause that ridiculous tape that's going, and maybe a new narrative can start, you
And,
know?
and I think that's one of the things that you bring out so beautifully and why you study such fascinating pieces to the outcomes that we are learning about. So this is new breaking news for people around the world noticing for the first time that we in fact have a responsibility to recognize what the brain is doing and the ability to respond to its capabilities. So going back to your research, it's fundamental for every listener today to recognize that, as Heidi just said, one of the pieces is you need to layer your healthcare format, much like an Olympic athlete. You will never see an Olympic athlete repetitively doing the same thing over and over and over again because they know that's where micro trauma and macro tears take place. So a marathon runner is going to be doing a very different routine on a regular basis just to protect the vital opportunity to maximize their output. So what I'm thinking as you're going through this breaking research, and it's critical for people to understand, is if you have opportunity to change the way you do things by getting the help that you need and recognizing there's other ways to layer into that routine of responsibility to take care of your brain, which is the most precious organ we have. You can be heart dead and still alive, but you cannot be brain dead and still alive. And I want you to appreciate what Dr. Heidi is saying today is we have opportunity to look back over time and say, how did we fundamentally get to our belief systems on what
Yeah.
the brain is telling us? Share more about when you, because it's got to be like, I imagine it, if I was like a scientist and had a rocket, I'd like the whole rocket going into space would be like overpowering. Like when you get into these lab situations and you get to visually see
I know.
different areas of the brain lighting up, it's got to
Mind-boggling,
be
Sherry.
amazing.
And so what I'd like to get across to those that are listening to us today is that there are things that you can do, like, for example, the ruminations, right? If you can catch yourself, as I think it's why things like mindfulness meditation are so important. Do you actually ever listen to yourself? I was shocked, Sherry, when I finally started to listen to my monkey brain, because I mean, it's always going there, right? But I wasn't paying attention to it. I had no idea how nasty I was being to myself. I
Yes.
wouldn't wish my own conversation that I was having in my brain on anyone. So picking up on what you're doing is a step. Another thing is like with anxiety, we know it's not necessarily so much about the rumination that goes on, but the catastrophizing. And again, I didn't realize what a catastrophizer I was. It was unbelievable.
I'm
You
having my
have
own epiphany
one,
right now.
you have one tiny little thing happen, and in my brain, it escalated into this massive problem, like within seconds. And that's often what's the key to people that struggle with anxiety. And I'm like, no way. So, A, being able to listen to the story you tell yourself, paying attention, and and then taking that pause. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes into, seeing good therapists, for example, they can help you, A, hear your story and pause without immediately reacting. So that's a key thing that you can do right there. But I also want to highlight again the difference of what happened, because the people in our study, they weren't seeing anyone else. They weren't being trained in mindfulness meditation. They weren't seeing a cognitive behavioral therapist to realize what there was going on in their minds. They were getting checked and adjusted by a chiropractor, extremely clever chiropractor. And in those 4 weeks, the guys that got the chiropractic care, there was these massive changes within these networks that are known to be responsible for things like rumination and catastrophizing. And like that's what was so mind-boggling to me, that waking the brain up, getting adjusted, waking the brain up, and then the brain recalibrating to reality was enough in these people to change not just how they were feeling with the chronic pain, but how they were feeling emotionally, how they were coping with their anxiety, their depression, fatigue levels changed. So again, it's like, because one thing we know what we're doing when we're waking the brain up is that that's quite exhausting. And again, if you've ever gone to a chiropractor, right, sometimes afterwards I'm shattered. And I think it's the body then going into healing mode because it's recalibrating, it's going into healing mode. This takes energy. But over time, like over the 4 weeks, these people were feeling more energized. They felt like they had better energy. So there's these interesting changes that are taking place when someone is going and getting checked by a chiropractor that I don't think most people realize.
No,
And
and
again,
when
I'm
I
not
when I go
saying,
back in there, Heidi, I want to just point out something because you said something that's so powerful is the adjustment itself is such a powerful opportunity for you to reflect on where you're at. Where are you today? And how you said you kind of you had these different moments of reflection of I get adjusted. And 100 years ago, we weren't sitting behind a desk. And we have this balance of the
Mm.
physical with the mental. And that's such a
Yes.
beautiful thing because when you have that physical activity, when you go out into the field, for example, and you're lifting, bending, twisting, pushing, and pulling, and then you have the opportunity to fix something. 90% of identifying the problem is just that, is I now know what the problem is and I can use 10% to put in what's the fix. So we're using
Yes.
our brain then. We're so out of balance in being in having lived in Silicon Valley for the majority of my adult life. You're right, Heidi, is you said so pertinently the capability that our brain has, that when we readjust it, that fight or flight mechanism physically drains you, that adrenaline that just kicks you up and gets you going. It's there for a reason. It's to give you that last bit. It's kind of like the last gas you have before you're like putting it off to get gas. It's like, oh no, we're at that spot. But that's
Important that we
it.
can do that, right? That we can have that release because it's vitally important for us to be able to learn new things. You can't actually, you don't learn something without having a bit of that noradrenaline, cortisol type release, and then you need to pay attention and then you need to sleep. So there's so much more we're learning about it. But if you're not actually having any output, like say, for example, you have that adrenaline and you don't do anything and you just sit at a desk, right? That's devastating because we know then that you're not pumping out all of that cortisol and noradrenaline and noradrenaline. And we know that that leads to stiffer and tighter of our bigger muscle groups because we're actually supposed to do something when we have that release as well. So, and it's really interesting because you watch these people, and I'm sure this is this later study that you want to talk about anyway, right? That
Yes.
the less we move, that is so correlated with a lot of these maladaptive brain changes and things like chronic pain, right? You
You're
tell me
absolutely
about the
right. I
study.
mean, and so the study I want to bring to our listeners' attention is 2025, and it in the I love giving the researchers the due diligence of respect and appreciation. So it's by Meng Yun Chen, and thank you if you're listening because your research is imperative. The BMC Public Health Journal puts, this is their title, the association between sedentary behavior and neck pain. It's a meta-analysis, so it's a great study to pay attention to. But what the key here, Heidi, is what they found was there's an increase in neck pain. So 70% of the world is going to get neck pain at some point in their life. We're gonna say that's a statistic that's actually coming out of the United States, but that's not gonna. I mean, the world is the world. Humans are humans. So imagine 70% of us at one point in our life are going to get neck pain. 80% of us, according to the World Health Organization, are going to suffer with low back pain at some point in their life. So here we go. Neck pain, if you have it, you're 88% more likely to have neck pain if you have a sedentary lifestyle or sedentary behaviors. But
Isn't
it
it
doesn't just
interesting?
stop there. It starts talking about our use of our cell phone, and that increases again to 82%. This is the latest, greatest information out there. And the reason why I wanted to bring it to your attention is because you're the neuroscientist. You get why this is happening. But fundamentally, I think this is a really interesting part. Now, we can't say it's causation, but we can say there's an association. They did see it was more likely in women than men. So I would like to take that PhD mind of yours that goes deep into the neuroscience and the chitty chat that happens in the brain. Tell us what you think of the study and why potentially there is this kind of outcome.
Well, very interesting that it's in women too, because we know women's brains are wired differently from men's brains. Women's brains are very good at thinking, and they buzz, 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 buzz,
All
buzz,
over
and
the
connect
map.
everything. And it literally can come right back to this, default mode network, that the study that we did too. We know that the thinking that we do about who we are, how we fit into the world, how we feel, how others feel, and the way we interpret how others feel is based on how we interpret how we feel, and facial expressions and all the rest of it. And all of this buzzing is going on in our brains in networks all of the time, especially women. So, and the more still you are, right? If you're moving, your brain has to be a little bit more active because it's having to then make sure that everything's working properly. So the stiller you are, the more chances you have to default into this, it's what's called the default mode network, because it's when we're not necessarily doing anything, paying attention to something, or there's nothing dangerous going on, we default to our default mode network. And this is what's been implicated so much in the development of chronic problems, not just chronic pain. So very interesting that it's this particular study is showing this connection with neck pain, but I bet you if we have a look as well, I bet you will find connections um, with the same thing with low back pain as well, with sedentary
Right.
life, you know. And it's interesting too, what we're finding now in the literature is that things like anxiety and depression and chronic pain, which could be chronic neck pain, chronic back pain, they seem to have a common pathophysiology, as in they develop together. And so the theories on this is that, when something happens to us, say you had an accident, what happens when you have an accident is three things at the same time. We think about it, so you have a cognitive response. This might be ruminating, it might be catastrophizing, it might be, what we talked about earlier, but you also have a physiological response. So that's where your adrenaline gets pumped into your body, you have that, cortisol, adrenaline reaction, and then you have an emotional reaction. Now, the degree of what we're doing there is how we're telling ourselves a story about the reaction that we're having physiologically and emotionally determines the degree of suffering. And this is a fascinating concept, Sherry, because pain is like there's kind of like two pain pathways. And
Sure.
because pain, we know that pain is created in the brain, but there's one pathway that actually tells you about the tissue pathology and sort of where there's injuries and, like, so say, for example, you had a car accident while you were having a massive argument with your partner, right? So you've got the argument thing going on, you have the accident, you might have not felt safe at the same time. And from then on, you've developed this low back neck pain problem, neck pain, because that's what the study's relating to. So what you're telling yourself in your own head, and this is where women we're better at this. Actually, we're worse at this, if you know what I mean. But you know what I mean? Like we're better at thinking about these things, overthinking these things. It determines this degree of suffering, and that's not the same as tissue pathology. And that's interesting to me that, we have these different parts of the brain, like the insular cortex and this anterior cingulate cortex. They're responsible for the degree of suffering we have. Now, that degree of suffering gets embodied into our default mode network, which is that network about who am I? Who is Heidi? What's part of Heidi? And that could be then that I've catastrophized and I'm ruminating in this accident and this argument, and it all becomes tied together. And my brain story or tape, cassette tape, right,
Mm.
from then on, is that I am a person that has chronic neck pain and a bit of anxiety and depression, and that becomes part of who I am. Now, changing that once it's become embodied is very, very difficult. So it's actually really important that we're aware of these things and maybe catch ourselves before we allow it to become part of. Like, you don't want to talk about this is my pain, my neck pain. Like, don't make it part of you. This is just an experience you're having, and it's not attached to who you are as a human being. I'm Heidi and I've got neck pain and depression and anxiety. No, no, no.
No, we're not
You know,
embodying that.
I'm not embodying that, yeah. So unpacking these things, it's really interesting, but it makes total sense according because I'm more of a basic scientist, and this paper is looking at epidemiology and these big connections
Sure.
between groups of people and things, but it makes perfect sense
You
according to
know,
the
you know what made such interesting sense when you just said that the unpacking of from a neuroscientist such as yourself, because you see the brain, it's an entity. For the majority of the people listening, they see the brain as pretty much a lump of material. We look at it. We don't we know that there's like little lines in it, but as far as it goes, that's about it. It sits in our head, and that's about as much as we can give it thought to. But think about this: is it does almost mix together when you have a trauma. I call it the trauma toxic soup. Is that
yeah.
it is so hard to get the carrots out of the soup once they're in. Like you have to really work at it. If you hate carrots, and I'm sorry to dumb it down this way, but it's a reality check for those of you listening to Adjust Reality. If someone says, come over for dinner and we're making this great beef stew, and you hate carrots, you're there for the first 20 minutes pushing them away the whole night long. It's like, I hate that thing. I wish they hadn't put it in it. So now we're thinking back to how the
It
brain
gets even
works.
worse if you take the analogy of bread. Like how can you pick the flour out of the
No,
milk
that's
or the
exactly right.
yeast?
And
It
and and being able to
becomes
do that.
it becomes enmeshed. You
Yes.
can't pick the ingredients apart anymore. And that's why you want to unpack it as soon as you can and not allow it to become enmeshed or part of your story.
And so important, as you say, if you get in a car accident and you were having an accident or a discussion, an argument with your spouse, it's almost immediate that you should be getting care. It's like people wait until the pain shows up. But whoa, whoa,
No,
whoa, whoa, whoa!
no,
Like
no,
we
no,
got to
no, no.
break the car before we take it for maintenance. Let's
Yeah,
back up for a second. Share with me your thoughts on
yeah.
if you were in this situation, for example, where you had said anxiety, Heidi has this, and this. Where would you start so that our listeners can say, I need my reality adjusted, Heidi. I need you to be very specific in the neuroscience of I have an injury. I don't want it to get to a place that I have to pick the flour out of the bread. Okay, so walk us
I would
through it.
immediately go get checked
Okay.
by a chiropractor. And the reason I say that is that what's becoming so clear in the literature now, when the chiropractor is providing that little thrust at the spine, they're really applying that to areas where there is dysfunction. And what we know happens to those little muscles around that area where there is dysfunction is the first thing straight after an injury, physical injury. This is Paul Hodges' work and several others, but they've done some amazing research on this that if you injure the spine, those little muscles around that segment, that particular part of the neck or back or wherever, where that dysfunction, where the injury is impacted, the spine, we know those little muscles immediately turn off. But over time, Sherry, those little muscles atrophy. So if you can imagine, right, if you were going to try and get them working again, when would be the best time to get them working again? Straight away and activate them immediately so that the brain is aware of what's going on and can be fully aware and make sure that you deal with the situation straight away? Or should we wait 2 years,
Yeah.
and those muscles have completely atrophied, have completely stopped communicating with the brain? All this stuff has gone on where your brain has been unaware of what's going on. Let's think about that one. No, let's go with the immediate. Go straight in and get it checked and adjusted. The amount of times I've spoken to people come in and they're like, oh yeah, I had this car accident and I had this sort of whiplash thing and and it didn't really hurt, so I just left it. And I'm already cringing because I
Yep.
already know that okay, this was 2 years ago. Okay, and then it sort of started, about 6 months ago, I started to get these twinges, and I'm like, oh, really? Really? And then to the point where now they've got this full-blown problem. I know that that brain has now developed this abnormality over 2 years, Sherry. And these neurons, the ones that wire together, fire together, they have learned to be in chronic pain. That's what bugs me. People don't seem to realize this. And that really hurts me because I don't want people to be in this chronic pain and problems.
You
So
know, this
even
is
if you,
breaking news. I just want you to realize that a lot of people, like you're living in
yeah,
this world, there are so many people out there that think that first and foremost, they need to focus on pain, that's
yeah.
actually their generator for treatment. That is so unruly and unnecessary. I mean, obviously, if you have an injury, you know right away, demanding the care that you
Straight
need.
away.
Yeah. And
Can
it's
we jump to the
interesting.
other end of it too, Sherry? Because another thing that does my head in is like if you're trying to if what a chiropractor is doing is exercising those little muscles back into proper function, you also don't stop going to see them just because the pain stops, right? As soon as you stop, then you see the thing is the brain has learned to turn those little muscles off. So as soon as you step off the curb funny, they might be switched off again. And so then all of a sudden, like 6 months later, it's back again. I'm like, yeah, no wonder. They've even done research on this, looking at what's called maintenance care. So they looked at like people that responded well to chiropractic care to begin with in the initial phase of care. So the people that responded really well then got randomized into either coming back when they hurt or coming back on a regular maintenance schedule. And that was only once every couple of months. So we're not talking like an onerous thing here, but like once a month, just go and get checked and adjusted, right? The end of a year, at the end of a year of this maintenance schedule, they compared then the amount of visits that they'd had with the chiropractor and the amount of days of pain that these people had experienced because they kept a diary. right?
Hmm.
Now, the people got seen about roughly the same amount of visits, whether you came back when it hurt or whether you came on that maintenance schedule. However, the people that only came back once it hurt, they had more days of pain, significantly more days of pain. So
Aha.
what again this tells me is like you need those little muscles functioning. If they've been switched off for 6 months to a year, they've atrophied. They need some attention. It's like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym once or twice and then expect to be fit for life, right? And once you've got your fitness levels up, you kind of need to maintain those fitness levels with the occasional gym session. You can't let it go. So it's just the physiology of it. Once you understand what it is a chiropractor is doing by exercising those little muscles that they can get moving again with the adjustments, the little muscles can speak to the brain again. The brain is actually aware, it recalibrates, makes sure everything that should be going on, it's aware of it, A, and B, then it corrects anything that needs correcting. It's just like a no-brainer, and it makes so much more sense. If you want to, A, if you've had an accident, get straight in to see your family chiropractor. I go regularly. I even pay for my own care. I pay for my care, my husband's care, my kids' care, my company's care, like my staff members. They get weekly care as well. Because to me, it's that important that we keep our brains aware. And I wasn't always like this, but that's now I have the data and the evidence. I'm like, there's no way I'm not doing this. It's kind of like the foundational piece of my healthcare regime. I also exercise, I take a lot of supplements, I do some mindfulness meditation. I see my therapist now and then to make sure that I'm not ruminating and catastrophizing like I used to. Again, it's habits, right? But the foundation of all of that is that I make sure that I keep my brain acutely and accurately aware of everything that's going on in my body and the world around me. And for that, I need my chiropractor.
And that's vitality. That is vitality, Heidi, at its greatest level. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of people out there that have not visited a chiropractor. And I know because you email me and then you ask, well, how do I find a chiropractor? Well, you're going to have to listen to the end of the segment to find that because we're trying to hit the 85%, the 85% that are not seeing a chiropractor. For those who are seeing a chiropractor, we like to give you a pat on the back because I think that you're not only changing the way you optimize your day, but that health span. We all want to live longer if we're feeling good, if we're feeling great. That health span, it's not about lifespan because who wants to live longer if you feel crappy? Like nobody wants to live a life full of pain and dysfunction. And if
The
we're telling you
quality.
right now, I know a billionaire who said to me, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself because I can't buy what I need. I cannot buy what I need. And he goes back to that saying, your health is your greatest wealth. You don't get a second chance at this. This is the
Yeah.
uplifting neuroscience. This is why people want Heidi back, is because it's like a power pill. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to do something now, like take action now. Before we
No.
go off the topic though, and I really do, I know I'm going to start a whole new flourish, but I'm going to haul her back in because we're going to do another episode. She doesn't know what I'm talking about yet. And I love to keep her in the dark until the very end. But listen to this thought process. If you're being the best you can and you are functioning at your optimum, then you're investing in your future and your community around you, which is your friends and your family. You don't want them to suffer. And what I want
No.
to ask Heidi is when you start to uncouple a lot of these traumas, like I, over the 30 years of treating patients, had seen, I'd start doing some soft tissue work on them, break up some old scar tissue. And, lo and behold, the tears start coming out and they're embarrassed. Oh, don't be embarrassed. This is full functioning reality. Adjust your
Oh,
reality to know when you start healing, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel tired. It's okay to need to take some me time. Talk to me about that, Heidi.
it that is I missed it before because I wanted to bring literally this point up, Sherry, because another part of the brain or part of that default mode that we were changing in this study, again, back to the same original study, was this part of the brain called the parahippocampus. And it's mind-boggling to me because I think a lot of the memories, like we know from not Eckhart Tolle, sorry, but Van der Kolk.
Yes.
Have you read Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score? And the thing is that the memories that we have that get stored inside of us, say, for example, back to that car accident with the argument, you might find that every time you have another argument with your partner about the same topic, that your body remembers the same patterning of dysfunction. And so, that's partly why these dysfunctions stay around or hang around. And what we were seeing then in the study was that we were changing this part of the brain called the parahippocampus. And this part of the brain is important for forming memories, retrieving memories, and modulating memories. So, what again you find under chiropractic care is that you can actually change the connections between some of these emotional traumas and the physical manifestations in your body. Well, that's what we're thinking anyway. I mean, I'm obviously trying to interpret what we're seeing here, but you can sometimes also change the story you've created around that trauma. And that's like called reframing. And this is when it gets interesting as well. It's like the brain can, because another thing that can happen, you can get into a car and you can get into those same emotional
100%.
reactions that you have, which is why I think when people get adjusted, they can have those emotional reactions. I think it's a great release. It's decoupling the connections between what's sitting in your body, which could be the neck pain or the back pain or whatever it is, right? From those emotional aspects of it. Because again, what's really interesting is the parts of the brain that are changing is also a lot of the prefrontal cortex and
Mhm.
medial, the orbitofrontal cortex, and all these parts within that prefrontal cortex, which is about you understanding your emotions and those of others. So it's that interconnectivity between human beings as well. So if you're shifting things like the medial orbitofrontal cortex, which is part of that prefrontal cortex, you're not only changing how you're interpreting sensory information from within your own body, but it's how you're understanding your own emotions, how you're understanding who you are, your emotions, and that of others. Have you ever noticed that you could be really triggered by someone's, behavior? But that can also be uncoupled because a lot of the times that's actually coming from you and your brain story and has actually very little to do with the other person.
It kind of happens
It could
with
be
when
that.
I'm with you, Heidi. I'm totally jacked up. I don't need coffee. I don't need anything. It's like I'm on a wired loop of like hit the ceiling, everybody, because Heidi's in the room with me. It's like we share a brain, because I know when you leave something out, I can set it down and go, Heidi, I need to send this back to you. You need to come back and tell me more about this. I tell you, it's it's
So
a
funny.
it's a wiring I
I
don't
get
want to get
called
rid of. I
Hurricane
always want to
Heidi.
be jacked up by Heidi. Okay. I want to
My
keep our
colleagues
listeners
literally call me
inspired.
Hurricane Heidi.
It's so great
You can
because
imagine, can't you?
you're kind of at that level where you start to recognize, if you can have that epiphany, like every so often I'll be on a walk or in the shower, and I'm physically not thinking about that thing, and boom, it happens, and this thought comes into my mind, and all of a sudden it's like, now I understand it. And it's so incredible when it happens. But
Mm.
you have to give your body the respect and the adoration it deserves. Like, you have to love yourself. That's first
Yeah.
and foremost. And so many of today's reality is being hard on ourselves, like we started this conversation. And
Yeah. It
then
took me a
when you,
long time to realize that one,
a
Sherry. A
long
long time.
time, this is a really critical point when we adjust where you are right now.
Yeah.
Can you look in the mirror tomorrow morning and really literally look in the mirror in a very sincere way and say, I love myself?
Mm. It took me a long time. About 15 years ago is when I first started to actually take care of myself. It was really interesting. I had this self-sacrificial story going on in my head for many, many, many years, thinking that I needed to sacrifice myself for everybody else. And I think a lot of women carry this just naturally, not that we've been asked to do it, but it's just a part of our upbringing. But
Yes.
letting go of that and realizing I'm not responsible for everybody. I'm only responsible for myself and to some degree my own children, right? But then actually taking care of myself. Geez, that made such a big difference to me when I started. And it started slowly and small, but you can do it. And me and my health today compared to 15 years ago when I gave it nothing, no time, no effort, no love. I think the only thing I might have done in those days was exercise a little bit. I mean, it's craziness compared to what I allow myself today
Hmm.
with supplements and time and friendship and having fun and, going out on a girls' trip. I'm going on a mums and daughters trip tomorrow and
Good for
little things
you.
like that, just to, you know, love time, just exercise and chiropractic to me, again, that foundation. So if you are getting checked and adjusted on a regular basis, how regular are you getting adjusted?
Yes.
Because to me, it's got to tie in with your lifestyle. I'm so bloody busy that I won't go less than once a week. I know a lot of people go down to, once every 3 weeks or something like that, but I'm just too busy. My mind's too geared up. But if you've never been to a chiropractor yet, please go and get checked.
It's so
Go find
important.
yourself.
And I want to take you just to a small spot. And I know this is going to lead us to the, oh, Heidi's coming back. She will come back. So let me ask you this, because chiropractic owns this very important area called sleep posture. And a
Yeah.
lot of people have not heard it put that way before. And I've done a lot of TV segments now talking about sleep posture because most people never think about the hygiene for their spine. And in
Mm.
fact, one of the replenishment moments of our life is actually, as we had the world renowned sleep expert on, Dr. Barry Krakow, the medical doctor, talk about brainwashing. Literally, the only time your brain gets to wash is at night.
Deep sleep.
Now, I
Deep
want to
sleep.
go back in. See, I'm seeing the steam coming out of Heidi's head right now. I want to ask you just very generally, because I know we're going to come back because I really, really want to have this conversation with you on a chiropractic level. From your study, you shared this incredible moment that people felt they slept better. And I
Yeah.
will tell you, America is riddled with people with insomnia and they're on medications because they can't sleep. And unfortunately, the expert says that a majority of these medications actually make you worse. And I wanted to ask you when you saw in your study, tell me about, did you expect it? And if so, what did you think about it?
I knew from the, it's a very big survey that's been done in America, I think 35,000 people. And out of those 35,000 people, 25,000 people had said that they'd seen chiropractors, somewhat regularly. And out of those 25,000 Americans, 40% of them, Sherry, reported that they slept better with chiropractic care. So I knew from that massive survey that a lot of, and of course, I mean, even, when I was seeing patients myself, it's one of the key things I'd hear is, oh my goodness, I slept so well last night after that last session when I saw you. It was just unbelievable, like that's such a common thing we hear, but there's no evidence on it. So that was, there's some case studies and series and things like that, but there's not a lot of evidence on it. And I knew about the deep sleep is like a dishwasher for the brain. But I
Yeah.
mean, that's so cool, right? That is so cool. And the devastating consequences from not having the brain cleaned is the buildup of all these toxins, which is a lot of our neurodegenerative and neurodevelopmental problems, and anxiety and depression, and all these other neurological diseases that we know of, right? So the devastating consequence of not getting that sleep is huge. So it's something I've wanted to look at for a very long time, but it was kind of like there's so much going on. I've got 35 scientists now working for me, the New Zealand College of
Wow.
Chiropractic, our Centre for Chiropractic Research. It's a big thing going on. And these brilliant, brilliant scientists. So I'm not necessarily involved in every single detail. And it just so happened that part of this study was that they were wearing Fitbits. And it was through the Fitbit that because of the movement, that the accelerometers in the Fitbit, you can pick up on the movement. So you can actually pick up on the sleep stages through those kind of, wearable devices. And these guys in our study had them for the full 4 weeks of the trial. They were wearing our Fitbits. And then we've got an agreement with Fitbit itself that we could get their data, their raw data, so we can actually analyze it ourselves. But you could get the sleep stages from it. So I was so excited to see that there was an increase in the light sleep. I was hoping for something like REM or deep sleep or
Right.
something like that, Sherry, but give me time and we'll see, right? But in this particular study, it was the light sleep, which tells me that they were able to calm down and go to sleep easier because you need to calm down to get into the light sleep, to get into the REM and the non-REM, the deep sleep and stuff like that as well. So that was really interesting. And along with that was the energy levels, the fatigue levels. So, they self-reported a significant improvement in their self-perceived energy. So, or a lack of fatigue. So significantly less fatigue. So they felt like they had more energy and they were sleeping longer in the light sleep phase. So because of this, we've now started looking into and fundraising for some proper big sleep studies. We've actually just got through very recently a grant from about 4 different organizations that we're going to be able to purchase these home sleep kits. It's not as bulletproof as the proper sleep studies that you do and you go into a sleep lab. But for a sleep lab, you need to have the lab. It's all shielded, which costs a fortune. You have to have technicians that are there all night watching the people that are sleeping in the different rooms and their full whole head EEG and all the rest of it. So it's quite a big expense. We're not quite there yet. But what we are getting are these home sleep kits, and we've got a couple of great experts again. They're going to be part of that. And Bo Woods is a chiropractor in Australia that's helped raise the money for this. We've got Professor David White, he's not a chiropractor, but he does a lot of sleep research, a lot of augmented breathing research, so a lot of how we breathe at night is also a really important part of this. So we're actually moving into studies now where we're going to send people home with these sleep kits in, again, randomized controlled type fashion to see then what can we pick up with these home kits on the sleep that is a better quality sleep measures than these Fitbits. But it is just, I mean, the deeper I dive into this rabbit hole, Sherry, the more like it's never ending, right? Because you do one study and you end up with 15 new questions,
Sure.
even though you've answered a couple of questions. So, and again, if I can just ram it home to people, I don't think you have any idea how important the function of your spine actually is. It is so much more than avoiding some pain. Honestly, guys, you need those spinal bones moving. You need those muscles communicating with your brain. It impacts so many aspects of your life. This, ability to relax and sleep, the ability to understand your emotions. We know it's got to do with fatigue levels, anxiety levels, pain levels. We know it's got to do with ability to learn. We've even done these motor learning. So if you're wanting to learn a new skill or task or musical instrument, you don't necessarily retain that learning if you've got dysfunction in your spine. And I could go on and on and on and on and on. So again, if you are not yet seeing a chiropractor, find a chiropractor. And
I
Sherry, if you
absolutely agree 100% with you. And you talk, and then I have 18 different questions, and then I want to go, but what about this research and that research and this? So we, knowing that you're listening and we respect your time, we value how much you come to adjusted reality with an open mind, and you really are adjusting how you see things. We very much appreciate you, Dr. Horvick, for coming in and sharing your wealth and knowing that I'm getting her back, because we know there's another 8 studies that I want to talk about. And you know as you start to go through your day, it's such an incredible moment to reflect on what Dr. Heidi has said, and that becomes the understanding that you get to control how your body and your brain work together by the
Mhm,
choices that you make.
mhm.
Dr. Heidi, I'm going to give you the last word.
I'd like to just reminisce on what you were talking about earlier about caring about yourself. And I think it comes down to that, actually allowing yourself the, and it could be that you're already seeing a chiropractor or you're not, but just allow yourself that gift of recalibrating your brain's reality so that your brain can function at its best by getting checked and adjusted. And if that's the first time you've ever gone in, wonderful. Please write to me and tell me how it goes, because I'd love to hear those things too. And if it's that you're already seeing a chiropractor, but you only go every 2 or 3 or 4 months, maybe it's going a little bit more often again as well. And enable give yourself that love so that your spine can properly communicate with your brain, so your brain can function at its best because it affects every aspect of your life. I mean, that brain of ours, it runs the show. If it's not aware and it's working off these faulty messages and stories that it's created for itself, it's not doing you any good. You know, get it updated, get it recalibrated today so that
Beautifully
you
said.
can be your best.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you, as always, for being on Adjusted Reality. And I want to thank you for tuning into Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Dr. Heidi Horvick about the neuroscience behind chiropractic care. Now, this podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. We know life moves pretty fast, and we want to make sure you never miss an episode. Visit f4cp.org/adjusted reality. While you're there, you can subscribe to our newsletter. And if you're interested in hearing from a specific guest, we get lots of emails. Share it with me. Send us your guest recommendation. I mean, we know you wanted Dr. Heidi Horvick, and there she was. Now, don't forget to subscribe. Share this podcast with your friends and family, rate and review, because I know you're being adjusted when you listen, and you want your community to be as well. And if you're feeling so inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a doctor of chiropractic near you, you can visit f4cp.org/find a doctor. If you want to supercharge your whole being, well, our brand new book, Adjusted Reality, comes out on October 14th. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can click the link below in the description of this episode and you can get your copy today. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in with you again soon.